My aunt kept telling everyone at family gatherings that my baby wasn't my husband's child as a hilarious joke. She went pale when I made her remember her funny crime. When our daughter Lily was born, she had bright red hair. Neither me nor my husband Daniel have red hair. I'm blonde, he's brunette. But my grandmother had red hair, and Daniel's grandfather did too. The pediatrician said it's completely normal, happens all the time with recessive genes. Everyone understood this except my Aunt Beverly. At Lily's first family gathering when she was 3 weeks old, Beverly took one look at her and said, "Well, we know what happened here," while winking at everyone. I asked what she meant. She laughed and said red hair doesn't come from nowhere. Maybe I had some explaining to do. Daniel's face went tight, but he stayed quiet. My mom told Beverly to stop being ridiculous. Beverly said she was just joking. Couldn't anyone take a joke anymore? But she didn't stop. Every single family event, Beverly would make comments. At my nephew's birthday, she asked Daniel if he wanted a paternity test for Christmas. At Easter, she told my cousin that Lily looked just like the mailman. At the 4th of July barbecue, she asked me in front of 15 relatives if I wanted to confess anything. Each time she'd laugh and say she was kidding. But Daniel stopped coming to family events after the 3rd time. Said he couldn't listen to it anymore. My mother-in-law heard about Beverly's jokes from my cousin. She started asking questions. Was Daniel sure? Had we considered testing? She never said these things to me, only to Daniel. He told me she was concerned about him being naive. His brother started making comments too. Subtle at first, then more direct. Asking Daniel if he noticed Lily didn't have his nose. Pointing out she was tall for her age when both Daniel and I were average height. Daniel started looking at Lily differently. Not with suspicion exactly, but with questions. He'd stare at her features during feeding time. Compare her baby pictures to his. One night I caught him looking up DNA testing websites on his phone. He said he was just curious about ancestry stuff. Beverly thought she was being hilarious. So at Thanksgiving, she brought a 23andMe kit as a gift. Wrapped it in baby paper with a card that said, "For when you're ready for the truth." She announced to the whole table what it was. Said every family needed honesty. Daniel walked out, left me there with our baby and 20 relatives staring at us. I followed him to the car. He was crying. Said he hated himself for doubting, but the constant jokes were getting to him. That maybe we should do the test just to shut everyone up. I said if he needed a test after 3 years together and a planned pregnancy, then we had bigger problems than Beverly. We went home without eating dinner. Beverly texted me that night saying Daniel was too sensitive and couldn't handle a little teasing. That if I had nothing to hide, I wouldn't be so defensive. I didn't respond, but she kept going. Posted old pictures on Facebook of red-headed actors with captions like "Lily's real daddy." Tagged me in articles about recessive genes with laughing emojis and comments like "Sure, John." Started a group chat with female relatives asking if anyone else thought it was suspicious. My cousin told me Beverly was placing actual bets on when Daniel would leave me. The breaking point came at Lily's first birthday party. We'd only invited close family, made it clear Beverly wasn't welcome. She showed up anyway, brought a gift. When Lily opened it in front of everyone, it was a onesie that said, "Daddy's maybe" on it. The room went silent. Daniel stood up, took Lily, and walked to our bedroom. I heard the door lock. Beverly was laughing, saying we needed to lighten up, that she'd bought it as a gag gift, that everyone was too uptight these days. That's when I lost it. I told her she was a miserable woman who destroyed relationships for entertainment, that her 3 divorces made sense now, that even her own kids didn't talk to her and everyone knew why. She said I was being dramatic over a little joke. I said her joke was destroying my marriage. She said if my marriage was that weak, it deserved to be destroyed. My mom tried to intervene, but I wasn't done. I announced to everyone that Beverly had been spreading rumors for a year, that she'd placed bets on my marriage ending, that she'd made Daniel so paranoid he was looking at DNA tests, that this wasn't humor, it was cruelty. Beverly tried to leave, but I followed her to the door. Told her if she ever contacted us again, ever made another joke, ever mentioned my daughter's hair color, I'd tell everyone about the money she stole from Grandma's estate. Her face went white. Beverly's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find words, but nothing came out. The living room behind me had gone completely silent. Not even the sound of someone shifting their weight or clearing their throat. I could feel every single relative staring at us, watching this moment play out like they were frozen in place. Beverly's hand gripped the doorframe and her knuckles went white against the wood. She tried to force a laugh, that same high-pitched sound she always made after her jokes, but it came out shaky and wrong. She waved her hand at me like I was being silly, and said something about how I was being so dramatic over nothing. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she took a step backward onto the front porch. I followed her and spoke loud enough that everyone inside could hear me clearly through the open door. I said we could discuss grandmother's missing $15,000 right here in front of everyone if that's what she wanted. I asked if she'd like to explain how grandmother's signature appeared on checks during the last 6 months when she couldn't even hold a pen anymore. Beverly's face went from white to red, and she shook her head fast while backing down the porch steps. She said I was a liar, and I was making things up to hurt her. I took another step forward and told her I had copies of every single forged check locked in my safe. She turned and practically ran to her car, fumbling with her keys and dropping them twice before getting the door open. Her tires squealed when she backed out of the driveway, and I watched her taillights disappear down the street before I turned around. My mother was standing right behind me when I walked back inside. She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the kitchen while everyone else stood around pretending they weren't staring. Mom's face was tight and her voice came out in a harsh whisper, asking me what I was talking about with estate money. I leaned against the kitchen counter and told her the whole story. 2 years ago, when I was helping clean out grandmother's house, I found a folder of bank statements in her desk. The statements showed checks written in the last 6 months of her life, all made out to Beverly, totaling over $15,000. I'd seen grandmother try to write her name on a birthday card during that time, and she couldn't do it. Her hands shook too much, and the letters came out as scribbles. I told Mom I'd compared the signatures on the checks to grandmother's real signature from before she got sick, and they didn't match. Mom's hand went to her mouth, and she asked why I never said anything. I explained that grandmother had just died and everyone was sad and fighting over money seemed wrong when we'd just buried her. I said I kept the copies just in case but hoped I'd never need them. Mom closed her eyes and took a deep breath before saying she believed me, and she was sorry I'd been carrying that secret alone. When we walked back to the living room, people were already gathering their things and heading for the door. Nobody looked at me directly. They all found reasons to study their phones or check on their kids or remember something they forgot in their car. The whole party cleared out in less than 20 minutes with people making awkward excuses about early mornings and long drives. Scarlett was one of the last ones to leave, and she pulled me into a tight hug before she walked out. She whispered right in my ear that it was about time someone stood up to Beverly. She said she was sorry she didn't say something sooner, that she should have told me about the betting pool weeks ago instead of waiting. I hugged her back and told her I understood, and I wasn't mad at her. She squeezed my hand once more before heading out to her car. The house felt strange and quiet after everyone left, with half-eaten cake on plates and decorations still hanging everywhere. I walked down the hallway to our bedroom and knocked softly on the door. I said everyone was gone and it was just us now. The lock clicked and Daniel opened the door slowly, moving carefully like he didn't want to wake the baby. Lily was asleep on his shoulder with her little hand curled against his neck and her red hair sticking up in every direction. Daniel's eyes were red and puffy and I could see tear tracks on his cheeks. He didn't say anything, just stepped back to let me in before closing the door behind us. We sat on the bed next to each other. Not touching at first, just watching Lily sleep between us on the blanket. Her chest moved up and down with tiny breaths, and she made little sounds in her sleep. Daniel and I sat there for what felt like forever, neither of us knowing what to say or how to start. Finally, he spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. He said he was sorry for doubting me, sorry for letting Beverly's poison get into his head, sorry for not defending me better to his family. I told him I was sorry too. Sorry I let it go on so long before I fought back. Sorry I didn't shut Beverly down the first time she made a joke. We sat in silence for another few minutes before Daniel reached over and took my hand. That night, after we put Lily in her crib and turned on her nightlight, Daniel sat on the edge of our bed and told me something that made my stomach drop. He said he'd actually made an appointment for a DNA test next week at a lab downtown. His voice shook when he talked and he couldn't look at me. He said he felt disgusted with himself for even considering it, but Beverly's constant comments had gotten so deep into his head that he couldn't stop the doubts from creeping in. He said he'd lie awake at night looking at Lily's red hair and wondering, hating himself for wondering but unable to stop. He told me he'd been planning to go alone without telling me, just to get the test done and prove to himself that he was being crazy. I sat down next to him and put my hand on his back. I told him I understood why he felt that way, and I wasn't angry at him. I said if taking the test would give him peace and kill the doubts Beverly planted, then we should do it together. Daniel's face crumpled and he started crying, really crying in a way I'd never seen before. He put his head in his hands and his whole body shook. He said he didn't want to be the kind of husband who needed proof, didn't want to be the kind of father who looked at his daughter and questioned if she was really his. He said he loved Lily more than anything in the world, and he hated that Beverly had made him doubt something he knew in his heart was true. I held him while he cried and told him it was okay, that we'd get through this together. We talked for another hour about what to do and finally decided together that we'd do the DNA test. Not because either of us actually doubted the results, but because we needed to kill the poison Beverly had planted once and for all. We needed something concrete that Daniel could look at when the doubts crept in at night, something that would shut down any future comments from anyone. Daniel got his laptop and ordered a home test kit right there, paying extra for rush processing so we'd get results in 3 to 5 days instead of 2 weeks. We both felt sick about needing to do it, but also relieved that we'd finally have proof we could point to. My phone rang early the next morning while I was making coffee. Mom's name showed up on the screen and I almost didn't answer, but I figured I should get it over with. She started talking before I even said hello, her voice tight and angry. She said Beverly had been blowing up her phone since last night, claiming I was trying to destroy her reputation with lies. Beverly was telling everyone in the family that I'd made up the whole estate theft story to get revenge for her jokes. Mom's voice got quiet and serious when she asked me point blank if the theft was real, or if I'd just said it to hurt Beverly. I took a deep breath and told her yes. It was completely real, and I had copies of all the forged checks in my safe deposit box at the bank. I said I could show them to her anytime she wanted to see proof. An hour later, my phone rang again, and Dad's name showed up. I picked up, and he didn't even say hello, just asked why I never told him about the theft. His voice sounded tight and angry in a way I'd never heard before. I took a breath and explained that grandmother had just died when I found those forged checks. Everyone was grieving and falling apart. I didn't want to tear the whole family into pieces over money when we'd already lost her. The funeral had been hard enough without adding accusations and police reports. Dad went quiet for a minute, and I could hear him breathing on the other end. Then he said he understood I was trying to protect everyone, but Beverly had been using my silence like a shield to hurt my family for a whole year. He told me he was going to handle Beverly himself now, and I should just focus on fixing things with Daniel. He said not to worry about the family drama anymore because he'd take care of it. We hung up, and I sat there staring at my phone, feeling weird about the whole thing. Part of me felt relieved that Dad believed me and was stepping in. Another part felt guilty for keeping the theft quiet for so long. That afternoon, my phone rang again, and this time it was Kayla, Daniel's mom. My stomach dropped when I saw her name because I figured she was calling to yell at me or defend Beverly somehow. But when I answered, her voice sounded small and shaky. She said she needed to apologize for questioning Daniel about paternity. She told me she realized now that she let Beverly's gossip get into her head and change how she saw things. She said she was ashamed that she doubted her own son and made him feel like he needed to prove something. She kept saying she was sorry over and over. I told her it was okay, and that I understood how Beverly's constant comments could mess with people's heads. We talked for a few more minutes, and she asked if she could come visit Lily soon. I said yes because I could tell she really meant the apology. My phone buzzed with a text from Christopher about 20 minutes after I got off the call with Kayla. The text was long and said he wanted to apologize for his comments about Lily's features. He admitted he was just repeating stuff he'd heard other family members saying at gatherings. He wrote that he never actually believed any of it and felt terrible for joining in. He said he should have stood up for us instead of making Daniel feel worse. I texted back that I appreciated him saying that, and it took guts to admit he was wrong. 2 days later, we did the DNA test. Daniel opened the kit at the kitchen table while Lily played with blocks on the floor. The instructions said to swab the inside of the cheek for 30 seconds. Daniel did his first, rubbing the long cotton swab against the inside of his mouth while watching the timer on his phone. Then I held Lily still while he did hers, which was harder because she kept trying to grab the swab and bite it. We got enough cells, though, and sealed both swabs in their separate tubes. The kit came with a prepaid shipping envelope, and we walked to the post office right away to send it overnight. The lady behind the counter scanned it and said it would arrive tomorrow. The waiting period was 3 to 5 business days after they got it. Walking back to the car, Daniel grabbed my hand and squeezed it hard. Neither of us said anything, but I knew we were both thinking the same thing. Every hour was going to feel like torture, even though we both knew what the results would say. 3 days into the waiting period, I got an email notification on my phone. Beverly's name popped up in my inbox, and my hands started shaking before I even opened it. The email was long, maybe 10 paragraphs, and she called me vindictive and cruel in the first sentence. She claimed the estate situation was just a misunderstanding, and I was using it to manipulate the whole family against her. She wrote that I'd always been jealous of her close relationship with grandmother, and that's why I was making up lies now. She said I was a terrible person for destroying family bonds over a joke that was meant to be funny. The email went on and on about how I was too sensitive and couldn't handle teasing. She accused me of turning everyone against her because I wanted attention and sympathy. By the end, she was saying I'd regret using lies to hurt her. I read it twice and felt my face getting hot with anger. I didn't write back to Beverly. Instead, I just hit the forward button and sent the whole email to Dad without adding any comments. He replied in less than 5 minutes. His message said he'd already contacted the estate lawyer that morning, and they were pursuing legal action against Beverly. He wrote that Beverly was no longer welcome at any family gathering he hosted, and he'd made that clear to everyone. He told me to block her number and email so she couldn't contact me anymore. I did exactly that. The next day, Scarlett called while I was folding laundry. She asked how I was holding up after everything that happened at the party. I told her I was okay, just waiting on the DNA results and trying not to think about Beverly. Scarlett got quiet for a second and then said she needed to tell me something. She revealed that Beverly had actually gotten 5 other relatives to put money in the betting pool about my marriage ending. She listed their names, and I felt sick hearing some of them because they were people I thought liked me. Scarlett said she refused to participate when Beverly asked her to join. She told me she'd even argued with Beverly about how wrong it was, but she didn't tell me before because she thought I already had enough stress. I thanked her for telling me now and for not joining in. After we hung up, I sat on the couch for a while just processing the fact that 6 people in my family had been betting on my marriage falling apart. Day 4 of waiting arrived, and I was feeding Lily breakfast in her high chair when Daniel came into the kitchen holding an envelope. His face looked pale and his hands were shaking slightly. He said the results came in the mail. I put down Lily's spoon and watched him open the envelope slowly, like he was scared of what might be inside even though we knew. He pulled out the paper and stared at it for what felt like a full minute without moving. Then he turned it around to show me. The paper had official letterhead at the top, and a bunch of technical language I didn't understand. But right in the middle in bold letters it said, 99.9% probability of paternity. Daniel's eyes filled up with tears and so did mine. We just stood there in the kitchen crying while Lily banged her plastic spoon on her tray and babbled at us. Daniel came over and hugged me so hard I could barely breathe. Neither of us said anything for a long time. That afternoon, Daniel disappeared into the garage for about an hour. When he came back in, he was holding a simple black frame he'd bought at the store. He'd put the DNA results inside it. I asked him what he was doing, and he said he wanted to hang it in Lily's nursery. I thought that was kind of weird at first, like who frames a paternity test? But he explained that he wanted a reminder of how close he came to letting someone else's poison destroy his family. He said every time he walked into her room and saw that frame, he'd remember what we survived together and how we didn't let Beverly win. We hung it on the wall next to the growth chart, and Daniel stood there looking at it for a long time. I put my arm around his waist and leaned against him. The frame looked strange hanging there with all the cute baby decorations around it, but I understood why he needed it there. 2 days later, my mom called while I was doing dishes and asked if we'd come to Sunday dinner at their house. She said she needed to see us and promised Beverly wouldn't be there. Her voice sounded tired and sad when she told me she was heartbroken about everything that happened, but she believed me about the estate theft. She said I did the right thing finally using that information to protect my family. I told her we'd come, and she sounded relieved. That Sunday, we drove to my parents' house with Lily in her car seat, babbling the whole way. Daniel seemed nervous and kept adjusting his grip on the steering wheel. When we walked in, about a dozen relatives were already there, sitting around the dining room table. My dad stood up as soon as he saw us and hugged me tight. Then he asked everyone to sit down because he had something important to say. The room got quiet and people stopped passing dishes around. Dad cleared his throat and announced that he'd filed a formal complaint with the police about the forged checks Beverly wrote from grandmother's accounts. Several cousins gasped and my Aunt Sarah put her hand over her mouth. But my uncle nodded like he'd been expecting this, and Scarlett reached over to squeeze my hand under the table. Dad said he had copies of everything, and the police were taking it seriously. My mom started crying quietly, and Daniel put his arm around my shoulders. The next afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room when my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it and heard a woman crying so hard she could barely talk. She said her name, and I realized it was Beverly's daughter calling me. She begged me to drop the theft charges and said her mother made a mistake but didn't deserve to go to jail. I sat down on the couch because my legs felt shaky. I told her as gently as I could that I wasn't pressing charges. My father was, and it was out of my hands now. She kept crying and said her mom had problems, but she was still her mom. I said I understood that. But Beverly had a whole year to stop attacking my family, and she chose to keep going. Beverly's daughter said I was being cruel and hung up on me. I sat there holding the phone for a while, feeling sick to my stomach even though I knew I'd done nothing wrong. That night after Lily went to bed, Daniel and I were sitting on the couch watching TV when he muted it suddenly. He turned to me and said he thought we should start seeing a marriage counselor. My stomach dropped because I worried he was going to say he wanted a divorce. But he explained that the DNA test proved biology and genetics, but it didn't automatically fix the fact that he doubted me for months. He said those doubts did damage and we needed help working through it. I felt relieved and scared at the same time. I told him I thought that was a good idea, and he squeezed my hand. He'd already looked up a few counselors who specialized in family issues and trust problems. We made an appointment for the following week. The first counseling session felt awkward from the moment we sat down on the therapist's couch. The counselor was a woman in her 50s who asked us to explain why we were there. Daniel started talking and admitted he felt ashamed of his doubts about Lily's paternity. His voice cracked when he said he hated himself for letting Beverly's poison get into his head. Then it was my turn, and I said I resented him for not defending me more strongly to his family. I told the counselor I felt alone dealing with Beverly's attacks, while Daniel stayed quiet or avoided family events. The counselor listened to both of us and said these were completely normal feelings after what we'd been through. She explained that trust damage takes time to heal, and we shouldn't expect everything to be fixed immediately, just because we had proof. She gave us some exercises to do at home about communicating our feelings without blaming each other. When we left, I felt exhausted, but also a little hopeful. 2 weeks after the birthday party disaster, Daniel got a text from Beverly's husband asking if we could all sit down and have a conversation. Daniel showed me the message and asked what I thought. I said absolutely not, but it was his decision too. Daniel texted back that Beverly wasn't safe for our family right now and we needed space. His hands were shaking while he typed it. Beverly's husband sent back a long message saying Beverly was struggling and felt terrible about everything. Daniel turned his phone off without responding. He told me he was done making excuses for people who hurt us. I hugged him and told him I was proud of him for setting that boundary. 3 days later, my dad called me in the middle of the afternoon sounding angry. The estate lawyer had contacted him with new findings about Beverly's theft. She'd actually taken closer to $22,000 over 6 months, not the $15,000 I'd originally found. The lawyer showed my dad bank records proving Beverly had been systematically draining grandmother's accounts while claiming to help with her bills. She'd forged grandmother's signature on checks and made electronic transfers to her own account. My dad said he felt sick knowing his own sister had stolen from their dying mother. He told me the police were treating it as a serious felony case now because of the amount. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened while he talked through his anger and sadness. Over the next few days, several relatives who'd been in Beverly's betting pool started sending me awkward apology texts. One cousin said she thought it was just a harmless joke and didn't realize how much damage it was causing. Another aunt texted that she felt terrible and wanted to make it right. I read each message but didn't respond to most of them. I was still too angry that they'd participated in something so cruel. Even if they claimed they thought it was harmless, they'd been betting actual money on my marriage falling apart. Scarlett called to tell me she'd heard two of them were trying to get others to pressure me into accepting their apologies. I told her I'd forgive them when I was ready, and not before. She said that was completely fair, and she'd run interference if anyone bothered me about it. By our fourth counseling session, Daniel and I had made some progress but hit a wall during one discussion. The counselor asked Daniel what was holding him back from fully trusting again. He got quiet for a long time, and then finally admitted he'd been struggling with feeling like a fool. He said everyone must think he's stupid for not seeing through Beverly's lies sooner. The counselor leaned forward and told him that being manipulated by a sustained campaign of lies doesn't make him stupid. She explained that Beverly had been deliberately and systematically working to destroy his confidence over more than a year. She said falling for manipulation makes him human, not foolish, especially when it came from family he was supposed to trust. Daniel started crying and I reached over to hold his hand. That session felt like a real breakthrough because he'd been carrying that shame silently. At the end of that same session, the counselor turned to me and asked if there was anything I felt guilty about. I hesitated because I didn't want to admit it out loud. But finally, I confessed that part of me had enjoyed threatening Beverly with the estate information. I said I felt guilty about using what felt like blackmail tactics, even though she deserved consequences for what she'd done. The counselor nodded and said it was completely okay to have complicated feelings about standing up for yourself. She told me that using information to protect my family from ongoing harm wasn't the same as blackmail for personal gain. She said I could acknowledge that standing up to Beverly felt good, while also recognizing it wasn't my proudest moment. That helped me feel less conflicted about the whole confrontation. The next week, my mom showed up on Tuesday morning with grocery bags and a determined look on her face. She said she'd be coming over every Tuesday from now on to spend time with Lily and help around the house. I started to protest, but she held up her hand and told me she needed to do this. She unpacked the groceries while Lily played with blocks on the kitchen floor. Mom picked up Lily and sat on the couch with her, just watching her stack the blocks and knock them down. After about 20 minutes of this, Mom looked at me and said she'd been thinking a lot about Beverly's comments from the beginning. She admitted she'd told me to ignore Beverly at that first gathering when Lily was only 3 weeks old. Mom said she wished she'd shut Beverly down harder right from the start, instead of treating it like harmless family nonsense. She told me she'd spent years trying to keep peace in the family by minimizing problems, and she was done with that approach. I sat down next to her and told her I understood why she'd reacted that way. Mom shook her head and said, understanding didn't make it right, and she should have protected me and Daniel better. She came back the following Tuesday and every Tuesday after that. Sometimes she'd bring lunch, sometimes she'd just play with Lily while I caught up on laundry or took a shower without rushing. It became this steady thing I could count on. 2 weeks after Mom started her Tuesday visits, Kayla called Daniel and asked if we'd come to dinner at their house on Saturday. Daniel asked if this was about Beverly, and Kayla said yes. His whole family wanted to talk to us. I could see Daniel tense up on the couch while he listened to his mom on the phone. He told her we'd think about it and call her back. But after he hung up, we sat there for a while not saying anything. Finally, Daniel said he thought we should go because his family owed us an actual apology, and this seemed like they were trying to give one. I agreed, but told him we'd leave the second anyone made excuses for their behavior. Saturday came and we drove to Kayla's house with Lily in her car seat. Daniel's brother Christopher answered the door and immediately said he was glad we came. The whole family was there in the dining room. Kayla had made this big meal with Daniel's favorite foods. We all sat down, and it was incredibly awkward at first with everyone just passing dishes around in silence. Then Kayla put down her fork and looked directly at both of us. She said she needed to say something formal and important. She told us that Daniel's family had failed to trust his judgment and support his marriage when he needed them most. Kayla said they'd let Beverly's rumors influence them instead of believing in Daniel's character and integrity. She apologized for questioning him about paternity, and for making him feel like his own mother doubted him. Christopher jumped in and apologized for his comments about Lily's features, and for repeating gossip instead of supporting his brother. Daniel's dad, who'd been quiet this whole time, said he was ashamed he hadn't stepped in to stop the family from piling on. The dinner lasted 3 hours, and it was uncomfortable the entire time, but I could tell everyone meant what they were saying. On the drive home, Daniel said it felt necessary, even though it was painful to sit through. The following week, my dad called and asked me to meet him for coffee. I left Lily with Daniel and met Dad at the coffee shop near our house. He looked tired when I walked in. We got our drinks and sat in the corner booth. Dad told me that Beverly had been formally charged with felony theft and forgery related to the estate fraud. He said the prosecutor had looked at all the bank records and forged signatures, and decided this was a serious case worth pursuing. I asked him if he was okay with Beverly facing criminal charges. Dad was quiet for a minute and then said he'd actually pushed for the charges to be filed. He told me Beverly needed to face real consequences, not just family disapproval and people being mad at her. Dad said that without legal consequences, Beverly would just wait for everything to blow over and then go back to her old behavior. I told him I felt conflicted about the whole legal route even though I knew Beverly deserved punishment. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Dad said he understood my conflict, but this was bigger than just what Beverly did to my marriage. He explained that she'd stolen from their dying mother and betrayed the family's trust in the worst possible way. The charges were filed and Beverly would have to answer for that in court. I asked if he thought she'd go to jail. Dad said he didn't know, but he hoped she'd at least get probation and have to pay restitution. Our counseling sessions continued every week, and slowly things started shifting between Daniel and me. The counselor gave us homework about rebuilding intimacy through small daily actions instead of trying to fix everything at once. Daniel took the assignment seriously. He started leaving me notes in random places around the house. I'd find them in my coat pocket or tucked into the bathroom mirror or stuck to the coffee maker. The notes would say things like why he loved me or what he appreciated about me that day. One note said he loved how patient I was with Lily even when I was exhausted. Another said he was grateful I'd fought for our family when he'd been too beaten down to fight himself. I made an effort to be more open about my feelings instead of trying to handle everything alone like I usually did. When I felt overwhelmed, I told him instead of just pushing through. When I was scared about the Beverly situation, I talked to him about it instead of keeping it inside. The counselor said these small changes were building new patterns of trust and communication. It felt awkward at first because we'd gotten so used to just surviving and managing crises, but after a few weeks it started feeling more natural. Daniel would ask me how I was really doing, and I'd actually tell him the truth. I'd ask him what he needed from me, and he'd be honest about it. We were learning how to be a team again, instead of two people just trying to get through each day. 3 months after the birthday party confrontation, my dad called with news about Beverly's case. She'd taken a plea deal and pleaded guilty to reduce charges. Instead of felony theft, they'd reduced it to a lesser charge in exchange for her guilty plea. Beverly got 2 years probation, had to pay full restitution of the $22,000 she'd stolen, and had to complete 200 hours of community service. Dad said the criminal record was what really mattered because it created official consequences for her actions. I asked if he'd talked to Beverly at all. He said no, and he didn't plan to anytime soon. Dad told me Beverly's daughter had called him crying and begging him to forgive Beverly, but he'd told her that forgiveness would take time, and Beverly needed to focus on her legal consequences right now. The plea deal meant no trial, which was a relief because none of us wanted to testify in court, but it also meant Beverly had admitted in an official legal setting that she'd stolen from our grandmother. That admission felt important somehow, like it made everything real and documented instead of just family drama. My cousin's wedding was scheduled for late September, and we got the invitation in the mail. Daniel looked at it and asked if I thought Beverly would be there. I called my cousin directly and asked. She told me Beverly wasn't invited and wouldn't be attending any family events for the foreseeable future. She said too many people were still angry and hurt by what Beverly had done. The wedding was on a Saturday afternoon at a hotel ballroom. We got dressed up and brought Lily in this little flower girl dress even though she wasn't actually in the wedding party. The ceremony was nice and the reception had good food and music. What struck me most was how relaxed everyone seemed. Usually at family gatherings there was this underlying tension, people watching what they said and being careful. But without Beverly there stirring things up and making comments, everyone just enjoyed themselves. Multiple relatives came up to us and said how nice it was to see Daniel at a family event again. One aunt told me she'd forgotten how much fun these gatherings could be without drama. Daniel actually stayed for the entire reception. He danced with me and with Lily. He talked to my cousins and laughed at my uncle's bad jokes. On the drive home, he said that was the first family event in over a year where he didn't spend the whole time wanting to leave early. He said he'd actually enjoyed himself and remembered why he liked my family in the first place. Lily started taking her first real steps a few weeks after the wedding. She'd been cruising along furniture for a while, but one Tuesday when my mom was over, Lily just let go of the coffee table and walked 5 steps to Mom's outstretched arms. Mom started crying and calling for me to come see. Daniel got home from work 20 minutes later and Mom made Lily do it again. Daniel scooped her up and spun her around, completely present in the moment without any shadow of doubt on his face. Over the next few weeks, Lily started saying more words too. She'd been saying mama and dada for months, but now she added more words like ball and dog and juice. Daniel was there for all of it, celebrating every new word and every wobbly step. One night, I was watching him play with Lily on the living room floor, making her giggle by pretending to steal her toy and give it back. His face was completely relaxed and happy. I realized in that moment just how much damage Beverly had actually caused. For months, Daniel had looked at Lily with this tension in his expression, this question mark hanging over everything. Now that was completely gone, and he could just be her dad without any of that poison in his head. The difference was so clear it almost made me cry. My relationship with Scarlett had gotten stronger through all of this. She called me at least once a week just to check in, and we'd started meeting for lunch every other week when our schedules allowed. One afternoon, we met at a sandwich shop near her work. After we ordered, Scarlett told me she'd been doing a lot of thinking about toxic family members in her own life. She said watching what happened with Beverly had made her realize she needed better boundaries with certain relatives. Scarlett admitted she had an uncle who constantly made inappropriate comments at family gatherings, and she'd always just laughed it off to keep the peace. She said she was done with that approach and had actually called her uncle out at a recent family dinner. I asked how that went, and she said it was uncomfortable but necessary. Scarlett told me that seeing me stand up to Beverly had inspired her to stop tolerating bad behavior, just because it came from family. We talked about how hard it is to set boundaries with relatives because there's so much pressure to just get along and not make waves. She said she was grateful our friendship had grown from all this mess, even though she wished it hadn't taken such an awful situation to bring us closer. One Thursday evening, Daniel told me to clear my schedule for the following weekend. He said he'd planned a getaway for just the two of us, and my mom had already agreed to watch Lily. I asked where we were going, but he said it was a surprise. Friday after work, we packed overnight bags and drove 2 hours to a bed and breakfast in the mountains. The place was small and quiet with a view of the valley. Daniel said he'd been planning this for weeks because we needed time to remember who we were as a couple, not just as parents defending their family from attacks. We checked in and went to dinner at a little restaurant in town. It felt strange at first being without Lily, like we'd forgotten how to just be Daniel and me. But by the time dessert came, we were actually relaxing and talking about things that had nothing to do with Beverly or family drama or legal cases. We talked about places we wanted to travel someday, and books we'd been meaning to read. We remembered inside jokes from when we first started dating. That night at the bed and breakfast, we stayed up late just talking in a way we hadn't in years. Saturday morning, we had breakfast on the porch and then went for a hike on one of the trails near the inn. The fall leaves were changing colors and the air was cool and clear. About halfway through the hike, we sat on a bench overlooking the valley. Daniel started talking about his dad and how his father had always avoided conflict no matter what. He said he'd been scared of becoming that kind of person, someone who just stayed quiet while bad things happened around him. Daniel told me he felt like he'd almost become his dad during the whole Beverly situation, just withdrawing and hoping it would go away instead of fighting back. I told him about my own fears of being walked over the way my mom sometimes was in family situations. I admitted I'd always seen my mom as someone who prioritized peace over standing up for herself, and I'd been terrified of becoming that person. We talked about how we both came into this marriage carrying our parents' patterns and fears. Daniel said the counseling had helped him see that he could choose to be different, that he didn't have to repeat his father's mistakes. I said I'd learned I could set boundaries and fight for my family without becoming bitter or cruel like Beverly. We sat on that bench for over an hour having the most honest conversation we'd had in years. Daniel held my hand and told me he was scared sometimes that he'd damaged our marriage too much with his doubts. I told him I was scared too, but I believed we could build something stronger than what we had before. We hiked back to the inn and spent the rest of the day just being together without any agenda or pressure. Sunday morning, we drove home feeling more connected than we had in months. Our counselor smiled when we told her about the weekend trip at our next session. She said we'd done the hard work of not just surviving a crisis, but actually using it to build something stronger than what we had before. Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand during that session, and I felt this sense of relief that we'd actually made it through the worst part. 2 days later, an envelope arrived from a law office I didn't recognize. Inside was a typed letter from Beverly saying she wanted to apologize and asking if she could be part of Lily's life again. The letter was formal and careful, probably written by her lawyer, and it made my stomach turn just seeing her name. Daniel and I brought it to our next counseling appointment and spent the whole hour talking about whether we were ready to even consider letting her back in. The counselor asked us what we needed to feel safe, and neither of us had a good answer, because the truth was Beverly had broken something that couldn't be fixed with a letter. Daniel said he didn't trust her and probably never would, and I agreed. We decided together that we weren't ready for contact with Beverly and we might never be ready, and that was okay. My father called me the following week and asked if I wanted to get coffee. We met at a place near his office, and he looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. He told me he'd been thinking a lot about his relationship with Beverly and how it was probably damaged beyond repair. I started to say something about how maybe they could work it out eventually, but he stopped me. He said protecting his granddaughter and supporting his daughter mattered more than maintaining family peace at any cost. He said he'd spent too many years making excuses for Beverly's behavior, and he was done with that. I cried a little bit right there in the coffee shop because I'd never heard my dad talk like that before. He hugged me and said he was proud of me for standing up to Beverly, even though it was hard. 4 months after the confrontation at Lily's first birthday, Daniel and I had our final scheduled counseling session. The counselor said we could always come back if we needed to, but we'd developed healthy communication tools and rebuilt our foundation of trust. She said most couples who go through what we went through either break up or stay together, but never really heal, and we'd done the actual healing work. Daniel thanked her for helping us find our way back to each other, and I felt grateful that we'd been willing to do the hard work, instead of just pretending everything was fine. We started planning Lily's second birthday party the next week, and this time we were very careful about the guest list. We only invited people who had supported us through the crisis, which made it smaller than last year's disaster, but so much better. My parents were coming, Daniel's mom Kayla was coming, Christopher and his new girlfriend, Scarlett and her family, and a few other relatives who had stood by us. No one who had participated in Beverly's betting pool got an invitation. No one who had made Daniel feel like he needed to question his own daughter got invited. The party was just going to be about celebrating Lily with people who actually loved her. The morning of the party, Daniel helped me set up decorations while Lily played with her toys in the living room. We hung streamers and balloons, and I made a cake with red frosting to match her beautiful red hair. People started arriving around noon, and the house filled up with warmth and laughter in a way it hadn't the year before. Everyone brought gifts and hugs, and no one made a single joke about paternity or hair color or anything else. Kayla spent 20 minutes on the floor playing blocks with Lily, and I watched Daniel watching them with this peaceful expression on his face. About an hour into the party, Daniel tapped his glass with a fork to get everyone's attention. He gave a short toast thanking everyone for standing by our family during a difficult time. He didn't mention Beverly by name, but everyone understood what he meant, and several relatives raised their glasses with visible emotion in their eyes. My mom wiped tears away, and my dad put his arm around her shoulders. Christopher stood up and added that he was grateful to be part of a family that knew how to support each other when it really mattered. Then it was time for cake, and we brought Lily to her high chair with the red frosted cake in front of her. She looked at it for about 2 seconds before smashing both hands right into the middle of it. Red frosting went everywhere, all over her face and hair and clothes, and everyone laughed and took pictures. I caught Daniel watching her with pure joy and zero doubt on his face, and that moment felt like the real victory. Not the confrontation with Beverly or the legal consequences or even the DNA test. Just Daniel looking at our daughter covered in cake and seeing nothing but love. My mother pulled me aside while Daniel was helping Lily get cleaned up. She told me she was proud of how I'd fought for my family. She said she'd been thinking about times in her own life when she should have been more assertive, and I'd inspired her to work on that. I hugged her and told her it meant a lot to hear her say that. Christopher came over with a woman I'd never met before, and he introduced her as his girlfriend Joyce. He told her this was his niece Lily, the smartest and cutest kid in the whole family. Daniel caught my eye across the room and smiled, and I knew he'd heard it too. After everyone left and we'd said our goodbyes, Daniel and I cleaned up together while Lily napped in her room. We picked up wrapping paper and put away leftover food and wiped frosting off the walls. Daniel said this birthday felt completely different from last year, and I agreed. He told me he was grateful we'd gone through hell together, because now he knew our marriage could survive anything. I said I felt the same way, and we finished cleaning in comfortable silence, just being together in our home with our daughter sleeping safely nearby. A few weeks after the party, Beverly's daughter called while I was doing laundry. I let it go to voicemail at first, but she called back twice, so I answered. She asked if we could talk about letting her kids spend time with Lily since they were cousins, and shouldn't be punished for their grandmother's behavior. I told her I understood where she was coming from, but we needed to protect our peace right now. She asked how long that might take, and I said honestly I didn't know. Maybe someday, but not today. She was quiet for a minute, then said she understood and hoped we could work toward it eventually. After we hung up, I felt guilty, but also relieved that I'd held the boundary without caving to pressure. Daniel came home from work the next Tuesday with this huge smile on his face. He picked up Lily and spun her around, then kissed me and said he got the promotion he'd been hoping for. His boss told him during the review that his communication skills had improved dramatically over the past 6 months. Daniel said he'd actually mentioned the counseling to his boss in a general way, talking about how working on personal growth had helped him professionally. That night after Lily went to bed, Daniel told me the whole nightmare with Beverly had taught him to stand up for himself in all areas of his life. He said he used to avoid conflict at work too, just like he did with family, but counseling showed him how to be direct without being aggressive. The following Sunday, we tried out a parents group at our church that someone had mentioned to us. About 8 couples sat in a circle in the church basement with coffee and donuts. The facilitator asked everyone to share one family challenge they were navigating. We heard about in-laws who ignored boundaries, parents who played favorites with grandchildren, siblings who caused drama at every gathering. When it was our turn, I gave a brief version of what happened with Beverly without using her name. 3 different people nodded like they'd experienced something similar. After the meeting, 2 couples came up to talk to us more, and we exchanged numbers. Daniel said on the drive home that it felt good to know we weren't the only ones dealing with complicated family stuff. My parents invited us over for dinner a few days later. Dad grilled burgers while Mom and I made salad, and Lily played in their backyard. Over dinner, Dad brought up Beverly without me having to prompt it. He said he'd been thinking a lot about how he handled things over the years. He told me he wished he'd addressed Beverly's behavior a long time ago instead of staying silent and enabling it. Mom agreed and said she felt the same way, that they'd both chosen peace over protection. I told them I understood why they did it, that confronting family is hard. Dad said watching me stand up to Beverly showed him it was possible to set boundaries without destroying yourself in the process. The conversation felt different from our usual surface-level small talk, more honest and real. I ran into one of the relatives who'd been in Beverly's betting pool at the grocery store the next week. She was in the produce section and saw me before I saw her. She walked over looking nervous and said she'd been hoping to talk to me. She apologized again for participating in the betting pool. said she felt terrible about it. This time, instead of walking away, I actually listened. I told her I accepted her apology and hoped she learned something about how gossip that seems harmless can actually destroy people. She nodded and said she definitely had, that she'd been thinking about it constantly. We talked for a few more minutes and it wasn't comfortable, but it felt necessary. That evening, Daniel and I were cleaning up after dinner when he brought up the idea of having another baby. I stopped loading the dishwasher and looked at him. He said he'd been thinking about it for a while and felt like we were in a good place now. For the first time since Lily was born, I wasn't immediately worried about what color hair another baby might have or what anyone might say. I told Daniel that and he grinned. He said he hoped they had red hair too, just to make a point. We both laughed and agreed we'd start trying in a few months once we felt completely ready. Christmas came and a card arrived in the mail with Beverly's return address. Daniel brought it in from the mailbox and we both stared at it on the kitchen counter. He asked if I wanted to open it and I said no. We'd talked about this in counseling, about how any contact with Beverly had to be on our terms and timeline, not hers. We weren't ready yet and might never be ready. Daniel put the card in a drawer unopened and we went on with our day. Kayla started coming over every Thursday evening to watch Lily while Daniel and I went to dinner or just took a walk. She'd arrive with little gifts for Lily and spend hours playing with her on the floor. One Thursday, she stayed after we got home and asked to talk to me privately. We sat in the kitchen while Daniel gave Lily a bath. Kayla told me she was ashamed of how she'd acted when Beverly first started spreading rumors. She said she was grateful I was giving her another chance to be part of Lily's life. I told her I appreciated the apology and that watching her with Lily now showed me she'd genuinely changed. Our anniversary fell on a Saturday in January. Daniel had planned a nice dinner at home after Lily went to sleep. He cooked my favorite meal and we ate by candlelight at our dining table. After dessert, he pulled out a small wrapped box. Inside was a necklace with Lily's birthstone hanging from a delicate chain. He said this past year had taught him that I was the strongest person he knew. I told him that standing up to Beverly had been terrifying, but knowing he had my back made it possible. We sat together on the couch afterward, just holding hands and talking about how far we'd come. The next weekend, we drove to the cemetery where my grandmother was buried. It was cold and gray, but not raining. We bundled Lily up in her winter coat and walked across the grass to grandmother's headstone. Daniel held Lily while I told grandmother about her great-granddaughter who had her beautiful red hair. Lily reached out and touched the cold stone with her little hand. Daniel held my other hand the whole time, and I felt like grandmother would be proud of how we'd protected our family. We stayed for a few more minutes, then walked back to the car with Lily between us, each of us holding one of her hands while she tried to jump over puddles. 6 months later, my dad called while I was folding laundry in the living room. He said Beverly was moving to another state to live near her daughter, and he thought it was probably for the best. I asked if he'd talked to her, and he said no. He'd heard it through my uncle. Dad said the family gatherings had been much healthier without her there, and everyone seemed more relaxed. He told me he was proud of how Daniel and I had handled everything, and that standing up to Beverly was the right thing even though it was hard. I thanked him, and we talked for a few more minutes about Lily and work before hanging up. Daniel got home that evening, and I told him about Beverly moving away. He nodded slowly and said good, that maybe now his family could stop walking on eggshells wondering if she'd show up somewhere. We decided to celebrate our progress by going out that weekend, just the two of us. Kayla agreed to watch Lily on Saturday night, and we drove to our favorite restaurant downtown. We made a rule before we even sat down that we wouldn't talk about Beverly or any family drama at all. Daniel ordered wine, and we spent the whole dinner laughing about silly things like the weird guy at his office who microwaves fish every day, and the time I accidentally dyed my hair orange in college. He told me about wanting to take Lily camping next summer, and I reminded him about the time he got lost on a marked trail for 3 hours. We held hands across the table, and I felt like we were dating again instead of just surviving together. On the drive home, Daniel said he felt like we'd finally moved past survival mode into actually thriving, and I agreed completely. The next Tuesday, I was making lunch when my phone buzzed with a text from Scarlett. She'd sent a photo of Lily playing with her kids at a family picnic I'd missed because of work. Lily was laughing in the grass with her bright red hair catching the sunlight, and Scarlett's caption said, "Look at this beautiful red-headed angel." I stared at that message for a long time because it was such a simple thing, but it meant everything. A year ago, people were questioning whether Lily was even Daniel's child, and now everyone was celebrating exactly who she was. I saved the photo and showed it to Daniel when he got home. That night after dinner, I rocked Lily in her nursery while she fought sleep like she always did. I watched her red curls stick to her forehead and thought about how this whole nightmare had actually brought Daniel and me closer together. We'd learned to protect our family fiercely and stand up against people who tried to hurt us. We were genuinely happy now in a way that felt solid and real. Our marriage was stronger than it had ever been because we'd been tested and came through it together. Lily was growing up surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally for exactly who she was. I kissed her forehead as her eyes finally closed and realized that sometimes the best outcome isn't perfect justice or fairy tale endings. Sometimes it's just peace and healing and a family that learned to stand together against toxicity.